an apparel brand that's doubling year over year on 8 figures? Join us here as Rob Fraser from Outway, the performance sock brand, talks about how they've optimized AOV and LTV, the power of focus in niche markets, learning from IRL customer interactions, and their expansion from D2C to omnichannel. Welcome to In the Money, an exploration of whether you can still make money in D2C and CPG. We follow the flow of money between founders, investors, lenders, and everyone else in the ecosystem to ultimately answer the question, is D2C and CPG still a good business? Hope you'll enjoy the show. So, Rob, conventional e-commerce playbooks say it's hard to scale with a $20 product. What do you say to them?
I would say they're right, but I mean, that's just kind of the surface level. I think there's a lot of nuance to specific categories or what you're selling. For example, we do sell a $20 on average pair of socks, but people buy typically much more than one pair at a time. So the average order value is a lot higher than $20. And then interestingly, when you think about socks compared to other apparel, socks, they have a higher replenishment rate than a t-shirt. They wear out quickly, and then there's a fashion element. So there's actually two sort of forces that are incentivizing a repeat purchase from people. So you're, selling a lower margin item, but you're selling more of them throughout the year. So it is, on average, we're just going to kind of have a smaller take, but much more of it. And so it is difficult. And I'd say and I kind of talk to founders a lot about this, is the question is yes, and. So what are you going to do to be creative? And so what we did is think, how else can we leverage what we're doing to build separate business lines within our business? So very early on, we actually built a private label arm to our business called Custom Lab, where we would actually develop some design socks for other businesses and sell them in large quantities for conferences or universities or brands. And so that allowed us to move a lot of units. And the real story there is, I started the business in college, and I got an email from one of my former sponsors when I was a competitive cyclist. They're like, can you do 300 pairs for this event? And I was like, yeah, I guess I sell socks, so of course I can do that. And I remember invoicing them, and they paid. I was like, wow, that was way easier than selling a single $20 pair of socks, which I was kind of doing hand-to-hand combat at the time. So a simple little unlock, but that's kind of the second layer to that question of yes, and it is hard, but you can find ways to move a lot of volume at the same time.
And how much have you played with the AOV math and the LTV math, bringing it forward, bringing it into the single purchase? Talk us maybe through that experience.
Quite a bit, especially since we're in Canada. So, shipping products is very expensive in Canada. So we're always trying to optimize around increase the average order value for the most part to make the percentage it costs to ship as low as possible. And so we're always looking at ways to just increase the amount of pairs in someone's cart or the price per pair that we're selling, because it really doesn't cost more to send 3 pairs or 8 pairs. It's really kind of volumetric at that point. It costs about the same. And so one of the unique things we did is we just had a mystery pair upsell, which immediately increased AOV. We thought, hey, people get to their cart and they're on average buying 3 or 4 pairs. What if when they're ready to check out a point of conversion, we just say, hey, you want to add a little mystery surprise for $10? And so that's a way to kind of get cart value up. And then on LTV, we found, in the data, when people on average would come back, one of the interesting things was it was actually a lot quicker than we had anticipated. It was typically between 25 and 30 days that people would come back and buy more. And the insight there was that we typically sell or acquire a customer through the design of our socks. So we're advertising online for the most part. We have a lot of kind of bold designed performance athletic socks that got different animals or landscapes. And that's really what captures people's attention. And they make that initial purchase, not really caring or knowing if the socks are any good. And so they actually get them when they bought them for some sort of emotional reason or the design. They put them on, they're like, oh, wow, these are actually incredible. And they come back and fill their sock drawer. So simple insights like that, and then building that into email flows or in how we operate the business certainly changes how we look at what's our tolerable cost to acquire a customer. How do we think about LTV? We don't kind of delude ourselves into thinking that we can overspend on acquiring because we think people will come back, because I think it's just a quick game to lose money and maybe get in a bit of pain. But what we have seen is a really large repeat customer rate. Over 50%, about 50% of our sales last year were from repeat customers. And that's been pretty consistent over the last almost 8 years.
I think one of the things that I've been really impressed by what you're building is You've built a brand around performance, but you've remained focused on socks. So how much willpower does it take to not expand categories? Because I'm sure you're wondering at a certain point, like, our customers have got all the socks that they need in their wardrobe.
Yeah, look, we've dabbled like early on. We extended into underwear. We even did sports bras at a time. We've done sunglasses. We've tested different product categories, and a lot of them have been successful. They've been seven-figure lines at some point, and we always default back to where is our attention best spent. The sock category globally is 50 billion and is growing. In North America, it's roughly 10 billion. And within the sock category, there are so many niches, whether it's compression or it's natural fibers like merino, or grip socks. There's all these little kind of niches that you can go into, which really act like their own little product categories. And then from there, there's the way you can distribute them. So about 2 years ago, we decided to kind of just double down on socks and increase the surface area in which people could find us. So selling on D2C, obviously, Amazon, wholesale, and then our private label business. And you know, like it used to take a lot of willpower because I'm like any founder and I've got a million ideas and just want to do everything. And we've got capital and resources at our hands. So it's like, let's just go do it. But now I'm just so kind of committed and focused on just saying like, look, our revenue compared to the market size, we're just scratching the surface of the surface. There's so much opportunity and there's so much runway that I think we're best served to be incredibly focused because we're operating in a hard category that we have made work. So, like my simple analogy here is just like, and I try to tell this to our team, and I've said this before, is like we're running a race and we're in the lead pack. And I think when, you're going to expand a different product category, you're almost kind of like catching a glimpse of another race happening off in the distance. You're like, what if I hopped in there? And then you find yourself in the middle or back of the pack. And it's like, sure, you can maybe develop a big enough business where you hire a specific team, they go up at that specific product launch and you do that. And you can have two people running the race, for example. But I would just say, like, at our current size, our resources are best allocated to the current goal. And there's just so much opportunity there that we're excited about it, constantly finding new things. And every time we unwind those product categories in the past, we find a new way to capture a different niche of the market or a new opportunity. And I'm always amazed at kind of, just still the amount of opportunity. I think, like, to say it simply, it sounded kind of crazy to even start a sock brand 8 years ago. People would say, like, they did say to me, like, oh, if it could be done, it would be done. And, our simple insight was a yoga pant for the foot. Let's combine something that's incredibly comfortable, all day performance, and then apply beautiful design to it. So someone can have a good looking sock for casual wear, but then keep that sock on, change in athletic wear and run a marathon. And people weren't really doing that.
Why do we love Numeral? Well, here's the good, the bad, the ugly. The good is that over 1,000 e-commerce store owners just like you use them for sales tax compliance, including some pretty big brands like Ridge, Emmy, Nomad, and Graza. The bad is that none of us got into this to spend a ton of time on sales tax and admin, which is why Numeral is able to help you in 5 minutes or less get full coverage, deal with registrations, ongoing filings, and compliance. It just happens in the background. And the ugly is that not a lot of store owners know that sales tax is actually personally guaranteed. Said another way, that the states could end up coming after you personally if you're not on top of it. Even a modest $5 million store owner could have Nexus in 20 or 30 states. Again, Numeral helps you stay compliant, and they even guarantee their work. That's why we love them. Go and check them out at numeralhq.com. You mentioned that you're a Canadian brand, Canadian founder. I'm curious, what percentage of your business is now in the US? And then maybe my kind of deeper follow-up question is, what do Canadian brands know about kind of operating businesses versus their American counterparts?
We're actually largely still Canadian sales. We're about 70% Canadian, 30% US, which always surprises people when they know our revenue because we've made quite a decent size scale here in Canada. I think that when we get into it later is kind of how we initially built the brand by really focusing on kind of going market to market here and building it from the ground up in real life in events and with people. And then what we would know about the US, I'd say like, maybe if I compared this to like what a US founder would know about Canada versus what a Canadian founder would know about the US is in Canada, we're very much in the know of like everything going on in the US. We kind of feel like we're very involved in like US politics. Like people here in Canada are also like keying Teslas, for example, like I'd say like I know more about the American economy and kind of politics and just culture my whole life than I knew more than Canada. It's just kind of, we're very focused where the opposite's not true. I talk to Americans; they don't really know what is going on up here, right? There's parts of the US where people don't know anything. So I say that's a unique advantage is we understand the Canadian market and we understand the US market. And we also understand that, like we're not the US market, but we're still 40 million people and there's still a lot of opportunity here. And so I think, the unique thing with understanding that is that like the pie doesn't need to be massive, but we can still go capture a great opportunity here and move into the States. Beyond that, I'd say that there's maybe not a ton of advantages, perhaps maybe some disadvantages by not understanding all the nuances of the American market by not being there. Um, but I would say the main thing is that we kind of understand both pretty deeply.
Before we clicked record, you shared a hot take that any e-commerce business should be able to get to $1 million in revenue without ads. My default position is probably the opposite of that, which is that more founders should be experimenting with ads, maybe even pre-product, to see what the throughput is, to see if they're on trend, if there's market pull. So yeah, I'd love to hear kind of your perspective on that.
I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you. I think that'd be a great way to figure out if there's just initial demand. What I think you wouldn't find out or have time to find out if there's going to be durable demand over time. So what I mean by like you should be able to build a business to over $1 million revenue without ads, meaning you've got to kind of do the hard work. You've got to build a product that somehow captures an audience in real life that people buy and then want to buy again and tell their friends about. And that was kind of our path. And I'm not saying this is like what you have to do. If I went back, I wouldn't probably take that advice myself. I'm just saying like if you are able to do that, I would bet very strongly that you're going to be successful once you start advertising and using the muscle that you have built by doing it on hard mode, by then applying some of the leverage of advertising and the digital space that we can grow these businesses in. And like when I started my business, I just didn't really know anything about anything. So I was in college at the time and I took socks and literally sold them hand by hand to people. And then from there, I went to cycling events, and sold them hand to hand. And from there, I went to bigger events. You got real time feedback, got to learn really what people liked or disliked about the product. I got to get really unique information about the questions they would ask, right? Because ultimately, that's what you're trying to do in advertising is you're trying to answer people's questions or solve their problems very quickly and then allow them to then convert and kind of, product market fit or problem solution. And I was able to absorb all of that for like when we actually started to scale the business online, it was, I'd say, a lot clearer on how we would do that. So I wouldn't say like, if you can't do it, it's probably not a business that's going to survive. I just say that like I think most people get into e-commerce or direct to consumer businesses with this idea that there's some sort of arbitrage or opportunity. And I'm much more a fan of building companies and building brand and building a business and building something that's durable. I'm not really like in the arbitrage game or the dropship game. So that's why I'm just like cool for the people that are, no hate. It's just I'm more in the kind of longevity business and want to create real value. And I think the best way to do that is to create a product that people want to keep coming back and buying and then tell their friends about.
I think that's actually a really important point, that you're spending the high quality, very dense time with people IRL in the early days to understand positioning, to understand what ad hooks might be, to understand product quality, to understand potentially what LTV potential is, versus kind of my suggestion of sitting behind a desk, experimenting with a bunch of different creative and product concepts, which is probably closer to what the median seller is doing, right? They're just sitting behind a desk and kind of gleaning through maybe customer service feedback, almost certainly not IRL. Maybe you could share one or two stories from those early days that changed the product trajectory, changed the positioning. What did you learn from those IRL experiences that you think the business still benefits from today?
Yeah, I think so the number one question we would always get, and if like when I say this, any one of my staff that's been around would just like cringe because we get it literally every person that come to a booth, they'd go, "What makes your socks special?" And that's an interesting question because like what are you really asking? Right? Like what is the customer really asking? And I think like only recently what I've really been able to think like or understand what this question means is if you walk it back to like what is the history of people receiving socks throughout their life. And when you think about it, when we were kids and growing up, socks were a gift of punishment, right? They were a gift you got that you didn't want to get. They were maybe wrapped up during the holidays and you thought it was something sick and it was just socks. Like everyone went through this when you're smiling. Everyone's gone through one where they've got socks as a gift. And you're like, this sucks. And think now you go into adolescence, teenage, you are starting to care about the things you wear. You buy shoes that signal to, people that you like X, Y, or Z. You care about your shirt or your jewelry or your hats. People don't care about their socks because they don't signal with them. And then you go into adulthood and you've carried these two sort of ideas of like, I hate socks and they don't actually bring any value to me. And so you buy them begrudgingly at the department store. And so the idea for people that socks could be $20 a pair, they're like, this doesn't make any sense. So what makes your sock special? Like, why does this even exist? The easiest way to answer that question is to have people try them on. Like we say, our goal is always socks on feet, because like once people try the product, they understand it, they get it, and they never buy anything else. And I think that unlocked, you talked about focusing on socks, and like this, it unlocked this sort of opportunity I found so interesting, is that I don't believe Outway is even competing with other sock brands. I believe we're competing with creating enough awareness that you should care about socks, right? So like there's the market, there's so many people wearing socks unaware that their life could be changed. And I'm not even joking, right? Like a good sock is life changing. It is actually the only piece of clothing that meets you and the ground, right? It's a barrier between you and what you walk on. And it actually creates a lot of support and a lot of health benefits when your socks or your footwear in that matter are done correctly. And so, kind of like that was an insight over time of being in real life and just being pounded with this question of what makes your sock special. And I wouldn't have been able to articulate this to you maybe 12 or 16 months ago. Like this is a relatively new insight. And then from there, just seeing how people, I'd say like the second one that's a little simpler and more tactical is like really understanding what's the limit of decision fatigue. So we have a lot of design options. And when you're in real life at a booth, we create a larger or a smaller booth, or how do we merchandise the product? At what point do people get too overwhelmed with the selection and leave? And so like you can take that information and then figure out how to best navigate or build the site so that they're not getting overwhelmed. What questions are they asking? How to filter through the collections? Because when you're, for us, we have a SKU count that's up to 600 sometimes, right? And so how do you serve someone the relevant selection that they're going to take the time to find, generally, which is going to be between 6 and 12 pairs, right? So how do you do that effectively? And in real life really allowed us to listen to those questions and understand what people are looking for to help them navigate the digital experience. So those are kind of like two ways that I'm not sure we ever would have figured out not talking to the customer. And that's like the most basic advice most people give is like talk to your customers, right? And just the superpower of being at a like trade show booth and just getting peppered all day is it's exhausting, but it's also incredibly valuable.
Today, I want to tell you about More Staffing, a group that we use to help us hire top-tier talent from the Philippines. Now, V1 of offshoring was hiring VAs, doing basic data entry work or administrative tasks. V2 is much more upskilled labor, folks that have been experienced for several years, up to 15 years, doing highly technical things, creative things, or in our case, hiring for supply chain managers and product development folks in the same time zone out of the Philippines as our manufacturers who are in China and Vietnam. More Staffing has deep expertise placing supply chain managers who have worked with Western brands, including many CPG and D2C startups, help run supply chain end to end. We love working with them. We've had several folks placed by them. Morestaffing.co, go and check it out. Given that it is just getting socks on feet, I'm curious, have you guys experimented with different things in terms of trial and returns?
I'm still trying to crack the code on the best way just to get socks out to people without just lighting money on fire. But what we do is we sponsor a lot of events, everything from, like cycling fondos or running marathons. We'll partner with those events where the participants get a free pair of socks on sign up. So that is actively going after our niche market. It's getting socks on feet. And the return on that has just been incredible. And to see it over time, there's a local event here in Victoria that gets about 3,000 cyclists each year. And as a former cyclist, I kind of got involved with them super early. And the first year we went there about 5 or 6 years ago, no one was wearing the product. No one knew about it. The last year I went, I'd say 90% of the 3,000 people were all wearing the product. And not even just the ones we supplied, like they had bought their own. It was honestly mind-blowing. And we've seen that happen many times. And I'd say that's kind of why we've captured a lot of the Canadian markets. We do this kind of strategically all over. And then we go outside of our niche too. Like, for example, at the TED conference this year, we were included in every bag there. So that's another 1,600 pairs of socks that get on feet. And those are people that own businesses or they're creative types or artists or whatever. And so, like, we're always looking for opportunities to partner with like-minded brands or events to get socks on feet. We found that to be a quite an effective way to do it.
16,000 socks. I mean, that's real cogs. That's a real that's a real expense. These other activations, these sponsorships. Is there just kind of a, hey, X percentage of marketing budget's going to go into brand? You know, you said at the beginning, you set out to build a brand and we're just going to commit dollars to it? Or is it like, no, we're tracking this, there's a code. If it doesn't tick and tie, we're not going to do it again.
There's certainly a line where we have a certain amount of budget that we're willing to do. But I'd say these things are super messy in terms of attribution. We do put like QR codes on the packaging that are specific to the events to track with codes, and we can track that. It's impossible to know then when those codes get picked up by discount aggregators or whatnot. A lot of it is just vibes, honestly. I usually will, like, the business will do things that we interact with, and there's a lot of just kind of anecdotal feedback of, like, I'll see a large corporate order come in and it'll just be off the cuff remark of like, oh yeah, we got these socks at Crankworks when you sponsored them. And like, that's all I need to hear to be like, look, this is working. And it's not a huge amount of money. Like, it's a big cogs, but in terms of how much we spend on Meta, for example, it's just like, doesn't even compare for the most part. So I just find that, like, if you make a good product and get it on people, you're best served to find a way to do that. I have just a high belief that the conversion's there and we've seen it work over time. And maybe it's just like a general little piece of advice. And, you know, generally general advice is bad, but it's just like, there is some merit to just getting your product out there if you believe it's good. And, you know, the returns will come, and not everything has to show up in your Northbeam dashboard and be super crystal clear. Like, you can actually just do things and it'll work out sometimes, as long as you're obviously not doing it at a huge scale and putting yourself out of business.
There's been a big push in the last 5 years for D2C native brands to go omni-channel. You know, you do corporate. Maybe we can talk through the channel mix, the evolution, and even areas that you want to be in future.
Yeah, so we've always done direct to consumer as well as our corporate, and we look at those as two separate businesses. Although the corporate business allows us to get socks on feet at scale while getting paid. So I guess I didn't talk about that either. So that's like great. And like, that's hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of pairs that we got paid to put on people's feet each year, which is awesome. And when a cool brand comes through, we often collab. So we'll do socks for both Red Bull or Disney, and we'll throw our logo on there and give them a preferred rate to also have brand inclusion in the kind of distribution of those socks, which is cool. But then I say, like, 2 years ago, we got pretty serious about channel expansion, and that was the new direction we chose to take instead of product line expansion. I was like, okay, if we're going to do just socks, we need to increase the surface area in which people can interact with us. Again, back to just like the basic psychology of socks, people typically buy them in store. That's where they're used to it. So let's get in some of the stores that make sense. We're in a lot of active stores throughout Canada, like niche bike shops, run shops. We're in MEC, which would be kind of the REI equivalent in Canada, and a bunch of other places, even coffee shops. We do really well in coffee shops because that's where every bike and run meetup starts and ends for the most part. And then Amazon. Amazon was another channel that, you know, like, for the exact stat, but a significant amount of apparel sales, I think it was like almost 30% of apparel sales last year were on Amazon. So it was like, if we're not there, we're simply omitting that side of the market. And the simple, like, thesis I have with Amazon is that we're spending so much on Facebook to generate demand and awareness or capture demand that I think there's just a large percentage of people going from an ad to our site and then searching for us on Amazon. I did it as a buyer myself. I found myself doing it over and over. It's like, okay, I'm doing this. I'm not that unique. Everyone's doing this. And since listing on Amazon, we see a direct correlation to ad spend on Facebook going up to Amazon sales going up. And so we're just capturing some more of those, some sales that we're never going to buy from our site. And actually, when we launched Amazon, we pulled a list of everyone who'd been on our email list that we hadn't sunset yet, that hadn't purchased, and we said, hey, we're on Amazon, and they converted like crazy. They were just never going to buy from our site. And we look at, you know, to wrap this point up, like, we look at everything that's not D2C as a way to generate awareness back to our D2C site. We basically want those ways to be even custom ways that people can find the brand, interact with the product, and then trust us enough to then convert on our site. And the way we have our merchandising strategy in those areas is that like all of the newest, best stuff, most expansive catalog is our direct to consumer site. In store, you're going to find a smaller selection of what the kind of buyers have brought in. On Amazon, you're only going to find our best selling stuff, which is maybe 40% of the catalog. And so if you want access to the best deals or the newest releases or limited stuff, it's all online. So it's kind of a way of like, let's get the best product out there, get it on people's feet. But if you really want access to kind of the whole thing, you got to come to our site, which is where we want you to convert. But I'm happy for people to buy anywhere, honestly.
To pull on that thread, pun unintended, of things operationally and tactically, we'd love to hear maybe a biggest win of the last year, and then maybe also something that didn't go as expected. Again, anything with brand or an assumption that you made, tactic, operationally.
Probably the biggest win is recently, honestly. I'd say we made a hire in Q1 this year that just, it was kind of like a fractional head of growth hire that just allowed us to kind of like step back on everything we're doing from a paid perspective and just kind of connect a few dots. We were doing everything, which kind of led to us just building this new process internally that just accelerated growth. You know, in March, we were up 92% year over year. April, we finished 90%. And that and that's on an 8-figure year last year. So it's not like, you know, it's not big growth on small numbers. It's big growth on okay numbers. You know, we're getting bigger, but it's good. And I'd say that was the biggest win, was just really understanding it. It's hard to explain what we did because it was like a million little things. It was product positioning, everything through content creation to ad account structure. We were doing all of these things right, but we weren't necessarily having the right order or in the right structure. And really just being able to figure that out has been just kind of game changing for us. So I'd say like the recent growth is certainly one of the bigger wins. What's not gone well? I'd say like I would have hoped maybe our wholesale expansion would have gone quicker. We have like a wholesale team. That said, I don't necessarily care that much either, because wholesale, although great, it's like terrible for cash conversion. And it's just kind of like that's the only part of our business where we have receivables. You know, everything else is either cash up front or on point of sale. So I'd say like, although going well, I had higher expectations for it. And I'd say like, honestly, if that's the thing that's going bad, I think it's been, you know, short of like tariffs, which I just don't even really want to, you know, lament on too much. Like I'd say like we've been kind of in a bit of a groove, kind of doing our thing. I'd say like 2 years ago, things were really tough. Like 22 and 23 were really tough for us, where we were just trying to overspend. We couldn't really figure out, you know, what was going to work for it. We were trying to fight the market ultimately, right? We kind of grew like crazy through COVID, like most consumer brands. And then when the growth stopped, I just was too hard-headed and also maybe inexperienced to like realize that I just can't fight the market. Like you know, like as much as I wanted to try. And then we also had to simultaneously rebrand due to kind of a legal dispute. So those were tough times, and we did a lot of hard work during that time to kind of position ourselves well now. And I think we're just executing on that plan still.
Today, I want to tell you about Move Supply Chain. We recently engaged them to look at additional options outside of Vietnam when the 46% tariffs were slapped on for our accessories business. They go and run an RFP process with dozens of manufacturers to get you sample ready on at least 2 backup vendors. Their operations team is based out of the Philippines, so an affordable cost, but as importantly, they're on the same time zone as our target Asian manufacturers. Move Supply Chain has deep supply chain experience with Western brands, including many CPG and D2C startups that you would know. We love working with them. MoveSupplyChain.com. Go check it out. I mean, I can't not ask the follow-up question of growing 90% year on year on an 8-figure business. I know you said that there were a lot of little things, but maybe I'll ask the question a different way. If I was to ask your fractional head of growth, what were the 2 or 3 things that they felt like they impacted most, what would they say?
I think he would say positioning for the US consumer. So we grew our US side of the business in that month 10%, like compared to the month before. And I'd say more than that, it's just like in the data, an unemotional sort of like, I think a lot of founders and a lot of teams might get a little caught up in what's our brand supposed to be, right? Like, how do we want to come across? And they'll fail to be like, if you just take all the emotion out of it, what's the data telling us? What works here? And ultimately what that was, it was like leaning extremely hard into design and putting those designs in front of the right people, and really doubling down on those designs and figuring out ways to build a website experience, kind of like I talked about before, that talks to those specific consumers. So I'd say it was just getting a lot more specific with the type of content and what was ultimately going to drive that initial conversion. We're kind of like looking at the full funnel a little too preciously, where we wanted to kind of have that experience a little more curated, where we decided to be like, you know what, at the very top, we've just got to convince people to like make that purchase, no matter how we do it. As long as we're not doing fraud or something like illegal, like we shouldn't actually care, because once they get the product, they'll get it. They'll get it, and then we can control the experience from there. So like, it's not a sexy answer. That's the thing, is like, I think ultimately when you're at some level of scale, just an outside perspective that like has like a couple little insights of things you're already doing can often move the needle quite a lot, which is why it's, as founders, really great to continually talk to people. Because I think where you're constantly walking around with a ton of things in your head, and you just get those little connections of dots, and you're like, I got it. And that's really what happened here. And it was really just figuring out what's going to work on Meta and allocating the spend to it. There was a bit of a tailwind in early March as well around the tariff kind of threats from the US to Canada. And so that created a lot of Canadian nationalism, and we leaned into that as a Canadian brand. That has slowed down. So it's been great to see that April continued up 90%, because we were kind of, part of us was like, hey, is this just kind of like a little bit of a tailwind, which it was, but we've been able to maintain that momentum other ways. So that's been great.
And then what's got you kind of most excited for the rest of the year? Again, anything tactically, channel, new product, any piece of tech?
I'd say it's just the US market, right? Because like it's a 10x market of Canada. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't our biggest challenge over the last few years of just not being able to make it work. And that's where it's working right now. And so I'd say what I'm most excited about is operationally getting the business set up for that, actively setting up warehouse there right now, US entity, kind of like getting the business operationally ready to scale there, and just continuing, because as a Canadian brand that pays Canadian expenses and accepts US dollars, it's a good place to be. And what makes me excited is like we've built, an 8-figure business relatively in the Canadian market. And with, like the kind of the exciting thing has always been like, hey, there's our neighbor that's 10 times bigger. We kind of just replicate there. You've got this economy of scale. And that feels like it's finally happened. It really feels like we're kind of like at that exponential curve and finally going up it. And so that's reinvigorated. We're almost 10 years into this journey, and like there's always new insights and there's always new growth opportunities. I think that keeps me super excited. And beyond all that, I just love socks too. I think there's always ways you can improve them. We've got some product launches coming up that are, I think, incredible. We've got one in particular that's just not even really being done on the market, which I'm not going to say too much about right now, but it's going to come out in Q4 and it's going to be pretty special, I think.
Rob, this is so awesome. Is there anything that you want from our listeners, a pair of socks they have to go and check out, anything you want from the universe as we head to a wrap?
No, I mean, look, if you found this at all helpful or fun, reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I always like chatting with people. And then, yeah, I mean, if you are walking through life with bad socks, just try it out. Try Outway.com, grab a pair, or go on Amazon. And honestly, if you don't like them, just message me and I'll refund you, because like I'm almost certain you're going to love them. So if you like this, buy a pair of socks. Message me if you do like them too. I love, I have like anything that's a 3-star or low gets emailed to me, and I like actively follow up with it still to this day. Because I'm just like, I'm always curious why, right? Like we have so much love, and if things not going well, I want to know why. So I'd say, yeah, like try them out. It's at Outway.com or Amazon, and let me know how it goes, how you like the product.
Rob, thanks so much for spending the time with us today, and can't wait till next time.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for tuning into the show with Rob Fraser from Outway. Please go and check out Outway.com and go and support Rob and his team. We're super open to feedback and would love to hear from you. DM, comment, Twitter, LinkedIn. Would love to hear what you think, types of guests you'd like to have on, types of topics. Thanks for joining again, and look forward to having you on the next one.